Following a nearly 3-decade-long diplomatic tradition, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi made Africa his first overseas destination in 2017. He has visited Madagascar and Zambia and is expected to continue on to Tanzania, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Nigeria. To talk about the significance of his trip, I'm joined by Dr. Oloo, Senior Lecturer with the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at the University of Nairobi. Dr. Oloo, thank you very much for joining me now. Wang Yi's trip spans from East Africa to West Africa, from the coastal area to inland and again to western coast of Africa. He started in Madagascar, which is a relatively newer friend to China. How do you read into the intention to put Madagascar on the top of his trip?
Basically, I want us to look at the fact that Africa is quite a diverse continent, and the way you have shown how the Chinese foreign minister has gone from East Africa to West Africa and now to the islands, it basically shows that in Africa you can never tie up the gains or the relationship by only visiting one part of the continent. You have to try and put together the different diversities that form both the culture and the political map of Africa. And therefore, I think that opening up 2017 by going to Madagascar and later Zambia is basically to ensure that the whole of the African continent, parts which have not been visited, are also brought in to fit into the Chinese African Forum.
Mm-hmm. Well, the reason why he went to Madagascar is also because Chinese investment and Chinese economic cooperation projects are relatively new to that country, and the local population and the local media are not very familiar with the coming Chinese, let's say. And a lot of people are trying to compare the Chinese model excuse me, of cooperation with what they had before from other Western countries or former colonial powers when they came in and invested or, cooperated with the local population. How do you compare these two models? I mean, the Chinese are bringing in opportunities and economic development by investing in infrastructure, whereas the Western countries had a different approach.
That's quite true. That's quite true that the Western route to Africa was mostly through colonialism, and that therefore the ties that continued therein were associated at times with what one could call neocolonialism. And you're also right to the extent that while the Chinese have focused more on infrastructure, or what some people have called long-term investments, that their profits or gains or dividends will be realized after a long time to come, you'll find that Western countries mostly focused on, let's say, education, health, food security, and the like, which basically one could say had what you could call immediate benefit for a very defined part of the population, while the Chinese are looking at it from a long-term basis. And I think I agree with you to the extent that when you go to a country such as Madagascar that had not had any Chinese influence, or what was called after the post-Cold War the Look East policy from many African countries, this is a new frontier for China to ensure that what they have offered elsewhere in Africa can also be experienced in countries that have not experienced it before, like Madagascar.
Well, I think it is also a learning experience for Chinese investors at the same time, because it is relatively new for Chinese capital, Chinese enterprises to go abroad. And there are all kinds of enterprises going abroad, state-owned, publicly owned, and private enterprises all going to Africa. And of course, there are different practices, and I think slowly people are starting to realize the importance of investing in the projects that you are mentioning: education, healthcare, food safety, and including helping the local people improve their farming abilities. However, on the other hand, there seems to be some kind of misunderstanding or how can I put it, the local media seems to always look for the problems in the Chinese investments, if I may. Correct me if I'm wrong, and pick on the small problems. For instance, when Wang Yi was in Madagascar, he was answering a question from a local journalist, and the journalist, despite the fact that China has invested hugely in Africa, picks on the unequal treatment of Chinese enterprises versus their local counterparts, and blowing a small thing much bigger. How do you look at this phenomenon? Am I just in what I said?
Well, yeah, you have to look at it because part of it is perception, how people perceive the relationship that China is bringing. There is a great perception not only in Madagascar but in quite a number of African countries that China focuses on the ruling elite. In other words, that the kind of investments and big projects that they bring about are to do with the ruling elite who want to demonstrate that they are bringing development, which however takes a long time before it trickles down to the masses, and that therefore what the masses perception is here is that there's nothing in it for us. It's just there to benefit the ruling elite and the ruling class and what you could call the upper class. So when a journalist asks the kind of question that you said is blown out of proportion, they are basically living to the perception of the common people who want to see results.
Dr. Oloo, I'm sorry, I have to,
from a long-term basis.
Yeah, I'm sorry to leave it there. I got your point. Thank you very much for joining me. I have to leave it there. Indeed, there are some misperception, but also in general, there are polls which show that over 60% of Africans do have a positive impression of China's influence in Africa. We'll discuss this very interesting topic in the future.